For over 4 years, Putin and his Kremlin cronies have relied on Russia's manpower advantage to make gains in Ukraine. This is a human versus human fight, Russia reasons, and Putin has plenty more meat to throw into the grind. But Ukraine has just turned the whole war on its head. Humans may soon be joined by AI humanoid robots that look like human soldiers, act like human soldiers, but are decidedly inhuman. These robot soldiers should never be used in war, Russia will cry. But Ukraine is using them because it must if it's to stop Putin's rampage in its tracks. In February 2026, the American company Foundation made a startling delivery to Ukraine. This was a weapon, 2 of them in fact, unlike anything that Ukraine had used before against Russia. Foundation didn't send drones. It didn't send a new type of missile or a fancy rifle that Ukrainian soldiers could use to pick off Putin's marauding forces. No, the delivery was a pair of humanoid robots named the Phantom Mark I, which the organization wants Ukraine to deploy for testing on the front lines to use against Russia. A natural extension of the increasingly automated war we've seen in Ukraine so far, the company's co-founder Mike LeBlanc claims the Phantom Mark I is both impressive and terrifying. Looking vaguely like a human, only in all black, this is a robot that walks like you would expect a robot to walk, and as it's developed, will be capable of doing everything that a human soldier can do. Powered by artificial intelligence, the Phantom Mark I has the potential to learn everything that everybody on the Ukrainian battlefield, from the newest recruit to the most specialized soldier, has learned. And if this robot works like the company believes that it could, it may well be the answer to a major problem that Ukraine has been staring in the face since Putin launched his invasion. We'll be digging into that problem a little later. First, put yourselves in the shoes of a Russian soldier for a moment. Like many thousands before you and many more thousands who will come after, you've been commanded to march through one of the vast 15-mile-plus kill zones that Ukraine has created. Most don't make it out alive, but you have a plan. You will use your eyes, ears, and every scrap of cover that you can find to get through. You move forward slowly, sometimes spending hours in hidey holes as you wait for the faint buzzing of drones to pass you by. Each day you inch forward, avoiding Ukraine's flying death dealers in the process, until you finally arrive at your target. You're prepared to launch your assault alongside a few of your comrades who also made it through. But that's when you see it. Off in the distance at first, but moving toward you unflinchingly. You fire off a couple of shots before getting into cover. Peeking out, you see it still moving, closer now. It looks almost human, but something isn't quite right. As it draws ever closer, you can see that the skin of this new soldier is solid steel, painted as black as night. On its face, you see no features other than a tinted glass visor that reminds you of every sci-fi film you've ever seen in your life. Perhaps the words of Kyle Reese of the Terminator fame come to your mind as you fire off yet more shots that you quickly learn are doing nothing to stop this inhuman monstrosity. It can't be bargained with. It can't be reasoned with. It doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear, and it absolutely will not stop, ever, until you are dead. You don't have to wait too long until you understand the truth of those words. The Phantom Mark I is upon you. And as you look on with mixed emotions of dread and wonder, you can do nothing to stop it from taking you out. As you watch with your last dying breaths, you see the robot walk away, continuing its slow march toward its next target, unfeeling, unflinching. A devastating hint at a future that you're almost glad that you're leaving to the rest of Putin's patsies to handle. A tad dramatic, you think? Sure, but in the Phantom Mark I, Ukraine has its hands on a pair of robots that have the potential to bring the very worst of sci-fi's horror stories to life for an entire generation of Russian soldiers. The specifications of this terrifying new machine are revealed by UKR Inform, and they tell the tale of a new humanoid weapon that is designed to be as close to the real thing as possible, while delivering a host of lifeless advantages that Ukraine is able to use against the Russian occupiers. The Phantom Mark I stands at 1.8 meters or 5 feet and 11 inches tall, and it weighs 80 kilograms or about 176 pounds. What sounds almost like a tail of the tape is reinforced by the robot's walking speed, which Militani says is 1.7 meters per second, or about 3.8 miles per hour. Again, that's right in line with what you might expect from the average healthy human. But it's in what this robot carries that it starts to diverge, assuming we ignore the jet black steel skin and the all-seeing visor. What not even the Russian soldiers who watch its unnerving walk will know until it's far too late is that the Phantom Mark I has a payload capacity of 40 kilograms, or about 88.2 pounds. Right now, that capacity is being used by Ukraine for supplies, which its inhuman robot is shuttling back and forth. However, it also creates the potential for so much more. Today, the Phantom Mark I is being used for reconnaissance and resupply runs. Tomorrow, it could be a walking bomb or an immovable soldier capable of firing at a Russian position as bullets ping off it uselessly. To add to the Terminator comparisons, the Phantom Mark I is powered by artificial intelligence. While we don't know much about what this integrated AI entails, it at least suggests that Ukraine's humanoid robot doesn't need a soldier behind the scenes who controls its every move. Questions of range and operator capabilities may be out of the window, much like anybody in the Kremlin who crosses Putin, as the AI in the Phantom Mark I could potentially be allowing it to move autonomously and make its way toward targets that it selects itself when it's on the battlefield. After all, we've seen Ukraine's AI-powered drones do many of the same things, as they can identify and target objectives while in mid-flight, making them as adaptable as they are dangerous on the battlefield. At least this is all of the potential that Ukraine's new robot offers. Right now, as we mentioned, the Phantom Mark I is being used for far more benign tasks than hunting and killing Russian soldiers. Still very much in the early stages of testing, this robot is being used for supply runs or to conduct reconnaissance at a distance, suggesting that its visor allows it to see far more than the average human soldier could see. And while Ukraine is testing this robot in the field, even more testing and tweaking are taking place all over the world. Foundation has announced that it has already received contracts worth $24 million from the US Navy, Air Force and Army. Phantom is going through tests in factories and dockyards from Atlanta to Singapore, the outlet says, and is due to begin testing with the US Marine Corps, which intends to start training this new robot to place explosives, enabling Marines to breach sites more safely than ever before. All of these capabilities and many more may lie in the Phantom Mark I's future, and the robot's use of AI, which presumably must include a software component, raises the possibility that it could be plugged in and updated, just like almost any computerized device in your home. Imagine that one day Ukraine downloads a firmware update for its robot, and in an instant the Phantom Mark I goes from being capable of patrolling and carrying supplies to being able to breach Russian positions. Maybe this is less like a Terminator scenario than we thought. It's all starting to sound a little closer to Neo in the Matrix. But Ukraine has some major reasons for testing them, and we're going to cover what they are in a moment, along with looking at some of the moral implications of Ukraine using something that Russia would argue should never be used in war. But before we do, this is a quick reminder that you are watching The Military Show. There's a lot more where this came from, so make sure you're subscribed so you never miss a video. We mentioned earlier the comments made by LeBlanc about Ukraine's need for more automation. He expands on those statements by explaining to Time magazine what he envisions for the Phantom Mark I in the US military. How many 50 caliber guns do we have? How many grenade launchers? How many Humvees? We need something that can interact with all of these, so having a humanoid really unlocks the entire US military, LeBlanc declares. The same is very much true of Ukraine, with an added problem that Russia has been able to create since day one of the invasion: manpower. Putin has always had more soldiers at his disposal than Ukraine, but after 4 years of fighting and despite Ukraine's impressive feat of taking 1.287 million and counting of Russia's troops out of commission, Ukraine is really starting to feel the manpower squeeze. As Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty reported in December 2025, Ukraine is struggling with a labor shortage as defending itself against Putin's forces has forced the country to empty its factories and farms. Between 6 and 7 million Ukrainians have also left their country rather than be conscripted into the war. The International Labour Organization says that Ukraine has just 1.6 million adults of working age left, with most of them being women. How accurate these figures are is up for debate. They don't change the fact that Ukraine needs to find a way around the issue that fighting a country with a population that is about 4 times larger than its own presents. Indeed, the Kyiv Independent argued in a January 6th article that it will be the effective use of manpower that will define who is winning the Ukraine war by the end of 2026. For Russia, that means finding smarter ways to use its advantage than simply throwing meat into the grinder. But for Ukraine, it means figuring out how to make the most efficient possible use of its manpower as it can, while it transactions to a strategy that focuses more on machines than men. That's where weapons like the Phantom Mark I come into the equation. And though Ukraine only has 2 of these humanoid robots right now, they are part of a far wider move to create a more roboticized Ukrainian military than anybody would have seen coming when Putin invaded. In a March 7th piece, the BBC explained how Ukraine has developed an army of robots that it's using as we speak to fend off Russia's advances. Reconnaissance and FPV drones patrol kill zones in a never-ending hunt for more of Putin's forces. At sea, Ukraine's unmanned surface vehicles have wreaked havoc on Russia's Black Sea fleet, in addition to enabling it to strike waterborne targets that should be a long way out of its reach. And more traditional ground robots with wheels and tracks, which feels like a strange thing to say given how new that technology is, have been helping Ukraine to deliver supplies, evacuate soldiers and carry out strikes. As Alexander Afanasiev of the Ukrainian Army's K2 Brigade tells the BBC, robot wars are already happening. They open fire on a battlefield where an infantryman would be afraid to turn up, but a UGV, or unmanned ground vehicle, is happy to risk its existence. The Phantom Mark 1 is essentially a UGV in human casing, and it may end up being a solution to one problem that the Atlantic Council says that not even a robot army can solve. Drones can't replace infantry, the Council said in a January 8th piece, and that is despite the many advantages that they offer in terms of manpower preservation. Replacing humans at scale, particularly infantry, isn't the domain of drones. We see that in how soldiers are still required for the search and destroy squads that Ukraine sends out to deal with Russian infiltrators. Drones may help identify the positions of these infiltrators, but it's humans who have to flush them out. Could the Phantom Mark 1 change all of that when it fulfills its potential? That remains to be seen. What it does for sure, now and into the future, is add a new element to a robot army that, despite its supposed inability to properly take and defend territory, is helping Ukraine to make the most effective use it can out of its human soldiers. By March 13th, United 24 media reported that Ukraine's UGVs are running over 7,000 missions per month, having surpassed the landmark in January. For context, those same UGVs ran 2,931 missions in November 2025 and 5,251 in December. UGV usage is increasing dramatically in Ukraine, and it's being accompanied by an overall rise in drones striking Russian targets. All told, the Ukrainian military's commander-in-chief Oleksandr Syrsky said in March, Ukraine's drones struck over 105,000 Russian targets in February alone. So the robots may not be able to replace humans outright, but Ukraine's drones, and now its experimental humanoid robots, go a long way to helping the country to diminish the presence of Russian soldiers and equipment, enough for some major recaptures of territory to take place. But now, we move on to a topic that looks to the future. Ukraine has unleashed humanoid robots onto the battlefield, but the big question is, should it? Right now, these robots, though terrifying in concept, are being used for reconnaissance and supply runs. Both are relatively benign activities that could lead you to question why anybody would wonder about the morality of their use at all. However, we've already touched on LeBlanc's mentions of developing these robots to the point where they can handle any task presented to infantry up to and including killing soldiers. That's where the questions start being asked. These are robots that feel no pain and no fear. They don't require feeding as a human would, and they would kill without any question. Yes, there are technical limitations as well as concerns about their use in the field from a practical perspective. We don't yet know how much combat data a Phantom Mark 1 stores, for instance, and the prospect of one being captured by Russia's forces raises concerns about how a single one of these robots could be enough to place a technology that Russia absolutely shouldn't have in the Kremlin's hands. But these are practical concerns, not moral issues, and they could perhaps be solved with the implementation of some form of kill switch that can be activated if a Phantom Mark 1 is compromised. Far more intriguing is the question of whether Ukraine should be using these robots from a humanistic perspective. Ukraine, and likely many of its allies, would argue that it should. Yes, these robots, should they fulfill their combat potential, are unfeeling, unfearing, and unrepentant. But then you could ascribe several of those qualities to Putin himself. Though Putin certainly feels fear, he seems to care little for the millions of lives that his insane quest to capture Ukraine has upended or outright destroyed. Perhaps an unfeeling machine is the best antidote for dealing with a dictator and the devastation he's wrought. Time magazine also brings up the interesting point that you could even argue that using robots is the moral thing to do, at least from Ukraine's perspective. The alternative is to traumatize an entire generation of people, some of whom aren't even out of their late teen years, for the rest of their lives by subjecting them to the horrors that Putin's invasion has created. A robot's lack of feeling becomes an asset in terms of the sheer weight of the mental health crisis that awaits Ukraine and Russia in the wake of this horrible war. If technology like the Phantom Mark 1 can help some of Ukraine's people avoid the pain of Putin's invasion, then why shouldn't Ukraine use it? There are several counterpoints to this argument. The fact that the Phantom Mark 1 uses AI is one of them, as hallucinations and incorrect usage of data are both problems that Ukraine might have to encounter. Again, this veers on the practical more than the moral, and we don't even want to imagine the consequences of Ukraine's potentially killer robots going rogue and targeting the wrong people. Far more worrying is that the widespread usage of such robots could lower the barriers for starting a war in the first place, Time magazine suggests. If it's not soldiers dying on the front lines, then the war can be dehumanized to the point where all that matters is the technology being employed. A lack of transparency in how this tech is used is also an issue, and one that isn't going to be solved, given that any side that uses what could be the next generation of robot soldiers would want to keep its technology under wraps. Still, imagine a world where Putin could throw all of Russia's superior financial muscle relative to Ukraine at a robot army. Ukraine would find itself in a similar position that it's in now, only without the option of deploying humans who could fight against the robots. Of course, all of this is speculative. And right now, as impressive as it is, the Phantom Mark 1 isn't advanced or numerous enough to create this kind of scenario. But some may wonder if its use represents another step toward a future of warfare that goes beyond even the horrors that we see now in Ukraine. Perhaps it is. But for Ukraine, an increasing reliance on automation and robotics is a necessity. It wouldn't have survived this long against Russia without it. Ukraine is also willing to make itself a testing ground for this kind of technology, as it is with the Phantom Mark I, which raises more questions about whether the country is being used by richer Western nations who provide this kind of tech, but don't deliver the weapons Ukraine needs to combat Russia's aggression. For LeBlanc, war becoming a technological contest isn't a bad thing. Droid battles with drones overhead and humanoids walking toward each other become an economic conflict. I think that's all for the better, he declares. And as much ethical hand-wringing that might be done now or in the future, none of it changes what's happening on the ground. The Phantom Mark I is in Ukraine. This is a historic first in war, as the slow march toward a complete automated war continues. Perhaps the Phantom Mark I will even help Ukraine to accelerate along the path to victory that is starting to look more likely as its drones devastate Russia. There are critical weaknesses in Russia's battlefield network that Ukraine is exploiting right now, and we explain what they are and how Ukraine is capitalizing on them in our video. Watch that video next if you want to learn more, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show to catch our coverage of the latest technological innovations to come to the Ukrainian battlefield. And thank you as always for watching.